Was Jesus ever political? If Jesus was not political, would that mean that it would be wrong for pastors to speak out against political issues if they felt that things were going wrong? If Jesus was political, then would that mean that it would be right for pastors also to speak out on political issues if they feel that things are wrong? Many Christians would argue that Jesus was never political, but I want to begin by sharing with you a quotation from a biblical scholar by the name of Nicholas Thomas Wright. Here's what he says, quote, "Jesus' message was, after all, inescapably political. He denounced rulers, real and self-appointed. He spoke of good news for the poor. He led large groups of people off into the wilderness, a sure sign of revolutionary intent. He announced the imminent destruction of the Jerusalem temple. And he deliberately and dramatically acted out a parable of the temple's destruction, and thus drawing onto himself the anger of the authorities in a way in which he never could have done by healing lepers and forgiving prostitutes, though we should not miss the revolutionary note in his offer of forgiveness, whose real offense was the bypassing of the temple cult. Jesus died, he says, the death of Lestai, the political insurrectionist Barabbas, and the two crucified with Jesus were Lestai. How could he not have been political?" End quotes. Lestai, by the way, comes from the Greek word lestes, and to translate it as thief is, as most translations do, isn't quite strong enough, because the Greek word for thief is actually kleptes, where we get our word kleptomaniac, one who steals and cannot stop themselves from doing so. The Greek word lestes is a much stronger word. It can be translated robber or plunderer, or as in Barabbas's case, insurrectionist. Of course, Jesus was not a thief. He was not a robber or a plunderer in terms of taking that which did not belong to him, but clearly he could be accused of insurrection. In other words, leading an uprising against an authority or a government. One reason contemporary readers might overlook the political aspect of Jesus' kingdom is that politics today are starkly different than what they were back then. Jesus did not campaign for one party or another. There were not two parties called the Republicans and the Democrats back then. However, Judaism was divided into four groups or sects, or even some called them denominations, and beginning with the smallest and least significant, there were the Essenes, who were ascetic and mystical group that was devoted to strict discipline, and they lived in isolation to the world, similar to what we might call a monastery. They are credited for the Dead Sea Scrolls. There were the Zealots. They were basically a nationalistic movement, not a religious one. They favored war and death over being under Rome. They would commit suicide before being taken captive. They were probably all killed off by Rome, along with the Essenes, because the Essenes were never very numerous. And two of Jesus' disciples, James and John, were both zealots. Then you have the two main groups that most of us are familiar with. That would be the Pharisees and the Sadducees. They were the greatest opponents of Jesus. And the main difference between them was that the Pharisees were primarily concerned about serving God, and the Sadducees were socially liberal and pursued political and economic interests. They were primarily the politicians and the political leaders in the Jewish society. Scholars cannot really determine exactly the makeup of the Sanhedrin, but many believe that both the Pharisees and the Sadducees were members. And the Sanhedrin would have been similar to what we call the Senate. It was the supreme Jewish legislative and judicial court. Now, with these points clarified, anyone familiar with the words and the actions of Jesus can clearly see that he was a political activist, like it or not. While Scripture notes at least two Pharisees in a positive light, that would be Nicodemus and, of course, Joseph of Arimathea, Jesus called other Pharisees and Sadducees a brood of vipers and whitewashed sepulchres, while he himself, as Nicholas Wright pointed out, quote, led large groups of people off into the wilderness, a sure sign of revolutionary intent. Jesus boldly spoke out publicly against the Pharisees, who were the religious leaders, and the Sadducees, who were the political leaders, for their corruptness. And because Jesus was a simple commoner, many people were greatly offended by his harsh words towards their respected leaders, while others were very happy to see him do it. Finally, make no mistake, when Jesus demonstrated time and time again that he was Lord, and when the early church declared Jesus is Lord, the net effect was to declare that Jesus was Lord, not the Roman Caesar. It doesn't get any more political than that. If this video has been helpful to you, give me a thumbs up. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell beside of it so that you'll be sure to get a notification the next time a video comes up. God bless. Jesus is Lord. I'll see you in the next video.